welcome. My name is Jen Mergel. I am the Beal Family Senior Curator of Contemporary Art at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and I'd like to introduce my co-moderator.
Hello, everyone. So good to be here today. My name is Deca. I'm the Associate Director and Associate Curator of the Arthur Ross Gallery at the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Deca. So we are going to be co-moderating today's 90-minute webinar, Curating Social Justice, 3 Case Studies. And just to share a little bit of housekeeping, this is the first webinar of the year that is offered by the Association of Art Museum Curators, the AAMC. It is an ongoing series of webinars that is organized by the volunteers on the AAMC's Professional Development Committee, really to engage our membership with key issues and innovations and best practices in the field of art curating. Our webinars are offered about 5 times throughout the year, and they serve as a live resource for exchange and then a video document for our members across the country when we're not meeting at the national conference. Just mark your calendars in case you're interested. The conference is May 7th through 10th in Houston, so you can check artcurators.org for more details on that. Now, to focus on today, just to run through, in our first hour, we will be introducing our panelists. We're going to review our focus on social justice. Deca and I will take turns leading a Q&A with each panelist on a case study. And then in our last 20 to 30 minutes, we'll share any questions that you have for our panelists. So you may type questions on, the question tab, which should be in the drop-down menu on the left or right of your screen. And we'll begin to address these questions just after the hour, but you're welcome to share questions throughout the presentations. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Deca to introduce our panelists, and then we'll share some introductory thoughts.
And thank you so much, Jen. I'm so pleased that we're going to have this discussion here today. I'm so glad that you all could join us, taking time out of your busy schedules. We're going to hear from our colleagues in the field with a diverse range of experiences and from different institutions with very distinct missions. So I think it'll be really exciting. So we're going to start off today with Melanie Adams. We'll begin in this order. Melanie, wave your hand for us so we know who you are. Melanie is the Managing Director for Community Education and Events at the Missouri History Museum, and we'll talk to her about dialogues and acquisitions at the Missouri History Museum, St. Louis, around the 14-venue exhibition Hands Up, Don't Shoot, which artists respond in the wake of Ferguson. And next we'll go to Rob Blackson. He's the director at the Temple Contemporary at Temple University here in Philadelphia. He'll discuss the installation Reform that's at the Temple Contemporary in collaboration with Fairhill Elementary School in Philadelphia, which the city has faced numerous school closings, dozens in the past few years. Then we're going to hop over to lastly Jamila James, last but not least. There she is. She's Assistant Curator at the Hammer Museum and the Curator of the Shared Exhibition Program by Art and Practice with the Hammer Museum and the Right Way Foundation in Lehman Park, Los Angeles, which directly supports the youth in the area. So welcome, panelists. Thank you, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I want to also just share my welcome. I think that you can tell from the ranging backgrounds and experiences that our panelists have that social justice is a broader topic that touches on many issues. But I think you can see that we have speakers who will be able to share their experience of how their curatorial practice can be engaged as, in one case, a response to a specific national event, also as a way to address a more systemic, localized issue, if it is education or public school systems, as well as a commitment to a community within a neighborhood and still speak to broader issues across audiences. So just a reminder that the goal today is to demonstrate ways in which social justice issues are inspiring new forms of curatorial practice. And we just want to acknowledge that, of course, social justice or the advocacy for equal rights and opportunity, it crosses many demographics and contexts, whether that is access to clean water, whether that is marriage rights, whether that is immigration and access to basic human rights. But this webinar is going to focus on 3 case studies that address urban race and class disparities. And these are initiatives that are at once innovative and relevant, and we're focusing on U.S. urban context. In this case, our panelists are invited to discuss how their shared programs are developed, not through proposals for, but through ongoing dialogue and collaborations with communities that form their audiences. In general, the aim is to show that partnering with community audiences can become a form of primary research that does generate new forms of curatorial practice. So thoughtfully curated art and dialogue does open doors to social justice, and museum and art professionals can affect change, not alone, but through strategic collaborations that balance community need with artistic insight. DJ, I'll turn over to you.
And absolutely, Jen. And as I was just thinking about this panel and thinking about social justice and curatorial practice, the first thing that may come to mind are exhibitions that have been done in the past, such as 1994's Equal Rights and Justice at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, or even the upcoming exhibition, Who We Be, at the Cantor Center of Arts at Stanford University. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg in our discussion and in means and ways to engage or even marry social justice and curatorial practice. I mean, naturally, we all can't mount blockbuster exhibitions and, like the 2 previously mentioned, but in 2016, sound curatorial practice must be built on incorporating multiple perspectives from multiple audiences in order to develop relevant, engaging, timely exhibitions. So I think it's important for audiences that they can see that curators are seeing what's going on outside of the museum walls. And these 3 amazing case studies today, they offer different ways of seeing and developing curatorial projects in a really dynamic way. I read a great article last month in the New York Times about how MoMA is starting to reorganize its collections in a way that crosses artistic and departmental boundaries. And in the article, Ann Temkin spoke about unlearning what we've learned regarding museum artistic hierarchies. And I think crossing boundaries is such a great way of looking at the museum in 2016 and curatorial practice in 2016. Incorporating social justice and advocacy for equal rights, it's vital to what we do. And there's many ways to do that. So, we're just going to kind of explore that today. And lastly, one last thought, with the advent of social media and real-time reactions, I think that curatorial practice today really demands that we think about that we think about social justice not just as a component of outreach programs or marketing and PR strategies, but it can be used to inform our curatorial practice at the root. And again, we're going to look at 3 case studies, but I think that really anyone can glean some curatorial practice nuggets from this discussion that they can use kind of throughout our practice. So it's just really exciting just to be able to, whatever tools that you can see that are presented here today that you can apply, please feel free to do so. And with that, let us begin.
Yes. So we're going to start with Melanie Adams. And Melanie, we are so grateful to have you with us here this afternoon. Missouri History Museum, and engaged in many living history events, we can say. And Melanie has a very distinguished and national presence as well as community presence. She's serving her 2nd year as president of the Association of Midwest Museums. She has done numerous presentations, but it's also coming from a higher education for Teach for America, St. Louis, and as a consultant for the St. Louis Symphony and the St. Louis Public Schools Foundation. She does participate in a variety of community organizations, and she's a graduate of the Women's Leadership Program of Coro and the Leadership St. Louis Program of Focus St. Louis. She's also a former president of Metropolis St. Louis and has served on the AmeriCorps St. Louis board and numerous other boards. In terms of her background, with her bachelor's degree in English and African American Studies and a master's of education degree in higher education and student affairs, she also has her PhD in educational leadership and policy studies from the University of Missouri St. Louis. So Melanie, I'm very grateful for your perspective here as you work with colleagues, curators across the museum who are accessioning, who are developing live programs, community talks, as well as follow-up reflections, panel discussions. So you have a very broad view on the way that curatorial practice can engage with an event. And in particular, I reached out to you to understand how it was in St. Louis with the multi-venue exhibition, Hands Up, Don't Shoot, Artists Respond, that the Missouri History Museum was engaged with this ongoing, say, cross-city exhibition, as well as situations in the weeks and months following. So the very first question I have for you is, how is it that the mission of the Missouri History Museum itself is one that you feel like is positioned to engage with social justice issues, and in particular, in the case of responses to Ferguson, how it is a platform to engage with what is a national event and it continues to unfold?
Great. Well, thank you, Jen, again, for including me in this important conversation for museums. The Missouri Historical Society, for the last 25 years plus, we really have been an anchor in the community in regards to community issues. We recently went through a strategic planning process, so our mission shifted just a little, but really the core of our mission remained the same, which is to serve as the confluence of historical perspectives and contemporary issues to inspire and engage our audience. And that really is the core of what we do. So whether that is on the programming side, the curatorial side, we really look at how can we form productive and positive community relationships that then make their way into our programs and our exhibitions.
That's great, and I'm curious if you can share, perhaps you may want to screen share at this point, some information on how it is, perhaps in this particular case, we can see examples of that.
Sure. Well, at the beginning, one of the things I like to really make sure people know is that the Missouri History Museum did not respond to Ferguson. We have been doing that type of programming for decades, and so the programs that we did, here should come up my screen, the programs that we did make sure that they kind of relate to those relevant topics of the museum. And these include, and these topics include issues of social justice such as education, violence. There we go. Yep, there we go, sorry. And so one of the things I really like to say to people, you'll see this huge statue of Thomas Jefferson sitting in our front area of our museum, and that is the first thing people see when they come in. And I say, if we can do the type of programming that we do with Thomas Jefferson sitting in our front lobby, anyone can do it. So I think that's a really important aspect just because of the controversial nature of who he is. And so I think that's a really good starting point to say that we have really found a way to work with the community, work beyond our history, the history of the institution and the building, to really find a way to connect with the St. Louis region.
That makes perfect sense. In terms of, oh, I was just about to follow up in terms of issues related to Ferguson.
Oh,
so
okay.
Carry on.
Sure. Well, one of the things is, as I keep mentioning, we do have a history of programs and exhibits that address these issues, and these are just a few of them. One of the ones that I really liked that we did actually happened right after the Trayvon Martin shooting, and it really was an opportunity for people in the community to come together, and we had different signs that they could hold up, and they would write responses to prompts, take their picture, and then a Facebook page was created where people could share their comments and concerns about the issue of Trayvon Martin. The middle one is the race exhibit, which I think has been all over the country once or twice by now. But this really was a wonderful opportunity for us to do a variety of diverse programming that really brought together the St. Louis region in a way it hadn't before. And finally, our third image there is of Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book The New Jim Crow. And this was just a wonderful experience that had over 700 people come and learn about the prison industrial system and how that ties to everything from race to education to housing. And finally, at the bottom, Question Bridge, which a lot of people considered more of an art installation than a history exhibit, and it really was a great way for us to examine issues related to African American men and boys.
And that's actually an interesting point, how it is that one might distinguish an art exhibition from a history exhibition, how one might distinguish the relevance of conversations around a historically significant event, like not only Trayvon Martin's shooting, but what has happened in, subsequently in a number of cities throughout the United States, and a notion of art. Is art separate, or reflection on art separate from engagement with the issues that shape our daily lives? And is there a space for a conversation around both reflection of something created for the art context and discussion and dialogue in the museum, which I guess leads me to this next slide about dialogue in the museum.
Yes, so this slide was taken the day of Michael Brown's funeral. We hosted along with national speaker who came in and really wanted to just talk with the community about it. So this is Kevin Powell. He's a national speaker, and he was really interested in how could he help us engage the St. Louis community. So we had about 400 people show up, and it turned kind of into an open mic opportunity. One of the things that was really nice was they really wanted to make sure they heard from a lot of young people. So they wanted to make sure that young people had the opportunity to voice their concerns, their fears, everything that was happening, because you have to remember this was still a really charged environment, you know, weeks, months after the incident.
Yep. Well, and I think it's an interesting point. We talked also about how, well, I should take a step back. Here at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, we do have a curator of lectures, courses, concerts, and somebody who is also engaged along with our curator of education in thinking about not only, say, the visual artists that we present in our galleries, but the individuals that we're inviting to lead discussions and dialogues in the public space, right? The forum of the space of the museum. And so it's interesting that your invitation is going out to the significant leader and somebody who can manage, I guess, the many perspectives and with the sensitivity of inviting lots of dialogue, lots of feedback, not just a one-way conversation, but a two-way conversation on that day.
And I'm really glad you brought that up, because one of the things I tell everyone when they're looking at doing these types of dialogue programs, it's important to hire a professional. Everyone thinks they can facilitate a dialogue till it gets charged. So we work a lot with our local ADL, Anti-Defamation League, the National Conference for Community and Justice. So we hire trained facilitators to do a lot of our dialogues and discussions, because I think that's really important to make sure you have someone trained to make sure the conversation doesn't do more harm than good.
Yep. Yep. So those are great community partners that you just cited: Anti-Defamation League, National Conference of Community and Justice. And I'm also wondering, you can move on also to your next slide, thinking about specifically the visual art that was created in response to what happened in Ferguson, and then how your curator and head of collections was also involved and engaged in what happened.
Sure. Well, there were two different ways. Our head of libraries and museum services is Chris Gordon. And so this first image, I think these first few, yeah, these show the panels that were created when people covered their windows because they didn't want them broken from the turmoil that was happening. And so artists came and actually painted over, let's go back, actually painted over a lot of these, and then these became pieces of art. And what happened was the museum got a call asking, could we take them? Well, as a curator, as you would know, there were some issues involved at first because they weren't painted with the idea that they would then be put into an archive. So we had to have our team go and take a look at them. They were able to take digital images of all of them, which obviously can live forever, but they did only select a few to be added to our collection. And so these, again, are on plywood. They're large, not half building size, but large enough, large billboard really type of size images. And so we haven't determined yet kind of what we will do with them. They haven't been put in an exhibit right now, but they are in our collection. And then continuing on that theme, there are some great images. This is of our curators and team out in Ferguson. One of the businesses invited us to come through and look through her shop and see if there was anything that we would like to collect for the shop and use. So this was another great opportunity.
So this raises a question I imagine all of us across the screen and those attendees at their desks might be thinking, which is, what was that conversation like around marking this important moment, and then larger curatorial questions about the quality of what's coming into the museum collection, and what was the criteria? What was it historical significance? Was it aesthetics? What was it that was, I guess, influencing how somebody would see their normal curatorial day-to-day work when they were making the decisions of what should come in? Were you, part of those conversations, and what was that like?
Right, and I think one of the things we were really, early on, I mean, no one really knew what was happening, so you have to think this event happened on a Saturday. We didn't know it was really going to turn into an event till that Sunday. So one of the things we really did was kind of wait for the community to come to us, if that makes sense. So we didn't necessarily want to see that we were taking advantage of a very bad situation.
Right.
So especially with our programming, we waited for the community to come to us and say kind of what we could do. More on the curatorial side, people, as the example here with this shop, they invited the Missouri History Museum in to take a look because they understood the importance. So we are collecting artifacts that would be able to tell the story. And as you know, a lot of times, especially in a history museum, a lot of people think it's only the story of famous people, but what we really like to emphasize is these are the stories of everyday St. Louisans in the region. This was an event that happened in the region, and so we were collecting everything from T-shirts to tear gas canisters to, we have a sewing machine. That is the shop that you see burned here. This was a woman's dressmaking shop. And so really looking at artifacts to help tell a complete story of the Ferguson event.
And that encourages me to ask the follow-up. We talked about this a bit, but you were just using criteria of really telling the story of a historical event, and timing seems so important to let the community come to you. So it does seem like you're using criteria of, say, the museum has used for events that happened decades or centuries ago, along with the criteria of other peer institutions, that the things that were collected must significantly tell a story, that they must be representative in a way. Are there peer examples, or were there other institutions, or were there other benchmarks that you were using as you were navigating your way through this process?
Right, and I think this was a little different than other events that we had collected around. Like another big example that came to mind for us at least was Busch Stadium, which was, a cornerstone stadium in St. Louis, and we went down and did video interviews when they were doing the last game and what that meant. So I think most of our events had been around happier occasions, if that makes sense. So we really look to peers of, and I don't want to use the word tragedy, but of larger events such as these, such as something like a 9/11 museum, the Oklahoma City bombing, memorial and museum. So looking at how soon is too soon, how do you approach people? I mean, there are a lot of different criteria that go into this when you're looking at telling someone's life.
Yeah, yeah. And while it's still unfolding and not resolved.
Right, right. It was, yeah, it had been unfolding for months. And then just quickly, I wanted to just show, these are images, and I bring these images up because this is from a program we did with our local newspaper, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, who actually won the Pulitzer for these images for the events in Ferguson. So that kind of gives you another idea of a program that we did, and I assume they'll probably be doing a few more things with these, but this was an opportunity for the community to see all of the different images, pretty much starting with the death of Michael Brown all the way through almost 4 or 5 months later.
Yep. So just to summarize, and then I want to open up also, Deca, if you had a question, or Jamila or Robert. So I'm seeing that the response is one where town hall meeting, convenings, also acquisitions as you're building this history as it's happening, but in a sensitive way. I also really appreciated, and people can look on the Missouri History Museum's website and see the invitation to news photographers discussing as panelists or presentations of the news photographs as significant photographs that are marking this occasion and raising questions. How is the media profiling what happened? What is the story being told by what images are selected or not? I know that you've also had follow-up town hall meetings, say 6 months after the event, et cetera, so that it's an ongoing conversation at the museum. So it seems like it's a multi-pronged approach, but the fundamental step is waiting for the community to approach you, which I think is a key takeaway here.
Right.
I do want to open it up in case anybody else has questions.
Melanie, I think that it's really interesting just in the first part of your talk about the mission of the museum is it kind of bridges the historical and the contemporary. And I think that's really fascinating, and it kind of leads me to a question, like how did the discussion programs from last summer and during MLK Day and since, has that had an impact on the community dialogue around the Black Lives Matter movement, et cetera?
Yeah, well, as I've mentioned before, we've always done those types of programs, so it didn't necessarily have a large impact on the types of programs we were doing, but it did really diversify our audience, I will say, because I think now more people in St. Louis are attuned to those issues, and they see how those issues affect other areas. I think one of the biggest questions in St. Louis after Ferguson was, how did Ferguson happen? And we were really able to look at it from education, from housing, from segregation, a variety of different areas through both exhibits and through programs. And so that really was the question that we were hoping to answer, kind of why did Ferguson happen? And so more people became interested in that discussion throughout the year.
I was wondering if I could just chop in with a question. Is that all right?
Yes, please. Absolutely.
Something that I hear quite often from within institutions is that they just don't have the time to respond quick enough. That there's such a machine involved in making a statement or trying to respond or react perhaps to a contemporary event that happens, that there's just not the mechanism there to do it. So how do you set yourself up so that you can and you feel that you are proactive rather than constantly wait until all the T's are crossed or the I's are dotted?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why it's nice that the community thinks of us first. So whether it was the Trayvon Martin program, that was a news media or news outlet coming to us wanting to partner to do that, or even the Hands Up Don't Shoot. So Frida Wheaton came to us probably back in August to do this event, and I knew that we didn't have space. So we couldn't hang any artwork. We couldn't have an exhibit in that sense. But I said, we are on board with a program. So when you are ready to do a program, a discussion around this, that's what we'll do. And that actually turned out really well for us. We were able to still participate, but it was at a little later date, and so we were able to get it in our calendar. But we still will do things that we call off-calendar if they're really relevant, especially if it's a partner bringing it to us. We're more likely to do it then than for us to just step out on our own and do something.
Mm-hmm.
And one last question, and then I'll invite Deca to then introduce Robert to present his case study. My last question also is what feedback you've gotten on the initiatives. So if there are if it's critical reviews, if there are discussions within the community, if in presenting what you've done at other sites nationally, if you've gotten specific or some resonating response that you think is important for people to consider and that you want to share.
I think one of the first questions I always get is that, oh, you know, how does the president and your board feel about this? Because I think for a lot of institutions, we may be stepping into touchy areas, and I think that's really one of the nicest things. Our museum leadership understands this is our role in the community, and they support that, and we have board members who feel the same way. I think our board is nothing but proud of the work we've done around issues related to Ferguson and other community issues. So that's usually my first question that people will ask around that. And then second, again, I always emphasize the use of trained facilitators. I can't emphasize that enough because more harm than good could happen. And finally, making sure that you have diverse voices at the table. So when you're looking at your community partners, making sure you're bringing in a variety of community partners, making sure that they have the respect of the community and they are knowledgeable in their areas as well, because I think all of the different partners bring something different to the table, and I like to think that the museum, we're a facilitator bringing out the best in everyone, and we're able to do that through our partnership programs.
Yep, that's great. Deca, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Robert, and we'll queue you up to be able to present your information.
Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Rob Blackson. He has been the director of Temple Contemporary at Temple University's Tyler School of Art since 2011. In 2012, Blackson became the Andy Warhol Curatorial Fellow, previously serving as a curator of public programs at Nottingham Contemporary, the UK's newest public contemporary art centre. He's worked with numerous universities, artists, and writers to develop an eclectic program of lectures, screenings, and performances, and live events. He's also served as a curator of the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art in Castle Gateshead in the UK. We're so thrilled to have Rob Blackson here with us today. And as the founding director of Temple Contemporary, he's initiated a programming model at the Contemporary that I'm really excited for him to talk about. So welcome again, Rob.
Thank you.
And just to kind of jump off, I wanted to ask you, coming to Philadelphia from the UK, just talk a little bit about your curatorial vision for the space at Temple Contemporary, and maybe how it differed from what was already existing in the space.
Sure. So Temple Contemporary used to be Temple Gallery, and it was a facility not unlike many other university galleries that you might be familiar with, where there's usually an alumni show and student shows, and then maybe one or two shows a year that highlight someone that the faculty or the curatorial staff at the university gallery feels would be of pedagogical interest to the art students specifically. And so when I came to Tyler, it had recently moved from kind of a suburban neighborhood outside of Philadelphia into the center city of Philadelphia. And so I came at this moment of transition. And with that transition, it made me take a little more time just to think and to listen about that transition and what would be an appropriate curatorial response to that transition. And for me, in the discussions that I had, it became evident that there was a tremendous opportunity potentially to create a relationship between Temple University, Tyler School of Art, and the greater Philadelphia area. And so it was out of that sort of awareness, perhaps, that grew out of that transition that I felt that Temple Contemporary could become something else. And that something else, I quickly realized, stood outside of my own skill set as a curator of contemporary art, that I have maybe a very limited, you could say, purview of what I care about on some levels, and that by involving a much broader range of interested folks to bring up those questions of what would make an interesting connection between the university and the city, that a whole range of perspectives could be brought into a curatorial agenda. And so that's what I set out to do when I got here.
Okay. And now, how did that?
To get there a little bit?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, tell us a little bit about the group of folks that that you gathered as an advisory committee for Temple Contemporary, kind of as your first step in remaking the program, and why did you feel this was necessary?
Yeah. So the advisory council it's a hot mess. It's like I like to call it a dog's breakfast, in the sense that there's 35 different people on this council. We meet once or twice a year, and it's a fairly simple ask, I have to say. There's just one homework assignment, we could say, for every meeting, and that's that every advisor has to come with a question that they don't know the answer to. And that question should have some sense of local relevance and international significance. And it's based on that idea of questioning things that people care about, but don't know how to take it any further than they know that this is important to them, and it's important to what they see happening around them. And so right off the bat, those meetings that we have are heartfelt. It's about things that people feel as though there is a growing conversation here, but there hasn't yet been a forum to address it in a way that they feel that whole issue could be creatively reimagined. And so, and I should also say perhaps that Temple Contemporary doesn't block itself into an exhibition calendar, and so we try to engage our programming the way that people having a conversation would engage. So there's no sense of end date. It's not as though, okay, this is an interesting topic, so we'll be able to sandwich it in between January and March or something like that. It's rather that we understand that these are issues that may affect people for a long time. And so as long as there's an audience that continues to care about these issues, we'll continue to take it forward. And so in that respect, the commitment, which I think is in some ways connected to trust, it kind of collects people, if you like, about issues that they care about. The advisors, some are activists, some are historians, nurses, farmers. It's a 2-year commitment, so they generally come to between 2 and 4 meetings over the time that they serve on the council. And it's 35 because 5 of them are local students of the neighborhood who are paid to come every week to Temple Contemporary and further develop their leadership skills into issues that are attractive and interested to them. So that's the way it's the 35. It's 30 plus those 5 that meet on a more regular basis.
Hey, wow. And now so once you have your core group, and you mentioned trust, and how did you really build that trust amongst the group, and then kind of see that reverberate out into the community? And as an example, the Reform exhibition.
Sure. So that's a great example whereby the questions that were coming to the advisory council, and I should say that the way that we determine which issues we're going to go with is based on a voting process at the end of every meeting. So if you put your hand up and say, the public education system of Philadelphia is in the toilet, we have to do something around this. When you put your hand up for that question that was raised by another advisor, you're basically voting yourself into a subcommittee of like-minded people, who come from those various perspectives to try to drill down on a particular issue. And so it's from that level of care which I think, again, this is the way in which commitment and trust are connected. You have a connection, I believe, between this idea of curating and caring as also being like-minded. And so when those advisors band together, it starts to form this circle of trust, you could say, which then leaches out into the wider issues that are affecting Philadelphia. So to give you a very, I guess, one-to-one example, Dwayne Drummond, who is, he works within the Philadelphia School District and the school system. He was the one who raised the question around education, and so he already has a circle of commitment connected to that issue. So when he goes out and says, hey, I work with this entity over at Temple, it's within the art school, and I see that there's a connection there, can we build something? And as well, Papana Sorio is on the advisory council, so he sees those connections, and it's through those connections directly from the advisory council into these issues that it's never more than one step away.
So that you should be careful when raising your hand on the committee, because you are.
Sorry.
Be careful when you're raising your hand in the committee meetings, because you are on the subcommittee. So when Reform came about as a project, as an exhibition, it seems that you were saying that basically the exhibition program is pretty fluid. So how is that played out in the Reform project?
So let's see here. How could I say that? The Reform project itself was a long gestation. I'd say we've been working on this we've been working on public education now and different aspects of it for over 4 years. So it's been a long haul, and the Reform, I'd say, is the largest we've been able to take on. And what is accomplished, I could say, is a growing understanding of advocacy and agency, to the sense that the Fair Hill neighborhood that had their public school closed, and this is, I think, most evident in the words of their former principal, Darlene Lomax, when she wrote an op piece to the Philadelphia Inquirer, wherein she stated that she was kind of beating herself up because she felt as though one of the reasons the school was closed is because they weren't good enough advocates for their school, which I think is a common and sort of a human response, to be like, you could have always done more. But what that demonstrated to us was a sense that perhaps in working with different advocacy and leadership agency institutions across the city, that is one benefit that we could collaborate with various residents and children in the Fair Hill neighborhood to build up that level of skill set. So if it's maybe not the public school, but maybe now it's going to be the health center that's across the street from the school, that they would then have the tools to see how they could turn that around.
Now, has as a gallery that's located within a university, is the university, do you find that's helpful as far as advocacy and reaching out to the community, or does that go the opposite way?
It goes both ways. For some people, Temple and Tyler School of Art is a great resource, and it's a great magnet for bringing interested parties together. For other people, it's a lot about land, and it's a lot about real estate, and it's a lot about fear of how big this thing is going to get, and it's right on their doorstep, and it's coming even closer. So it's a very difficult and honest conversation to have with people. For example, this is Fair Hill School is still for sale. The public school district in Philadelphia is trying to sell the building, and Temple was one of the potential buyers. So you have a very thick contention around real estate and around what that may mean in terms of property values and people getting pushed out and all of that. To take an aside, I could say that about 2 years ago we did a project called Funeral for a Home, which was addressing in many ways the deterioration of a lot of housing stock in Philadelphia. We did that project in West Philadelphia, about 3 miles from Temple, and it wasn't an issue at all because we were we weren't a contender in that real estate stuff. But here, when Fair Hill is just a half a mile away from the Tyler School of Art, it that becomes an issue.
Great. Dijay, may I jump in for a second?
Please do, yes.
So, Robert, I would love to see what you have up on screen right now in terms of how it is that, specifically in the case of, it sounds like curating through questions in a way, you know, asking individuals to come with questions that reform itself. If you can talk us through the case study of the project and how it is that was manifest, that question became an experience in the space of Temple Contemporary.
Yes. So that's a great question, because in so many respects it is coming out of questions. And so when I'm sitting in those meetings of the advisory council, I have no clue what we're going to be doing by the end of them. It's like, okay, so now we're doing this. So for example, a couple months ago, somebody asked the question, are we sufficiently bored? And I had never really thought about that, but it got a lot of votes, and people really cared about that. So we're like, okay, we're going to be doing stuff on boredom, which has turned into a whole bunch of other programs that I would have never imagined previously. So it's a fun way to be responsive, I could say. But yeah, so what we're looking at here on screen is an example of the first time that we gathered people together. Because as I said earlier, a lot of what Temple Contemporary does relies on the fact that people want to care about these issues. And so if we would have done this reunion, which is a reunion that we did last December, then it was the first time that students and former teachers and the principal and parents of Fair Hill decided to come together. And we just did a Facebook blast and said, does anybody want to come to this from Fair Hill? And we got, as you can see, maybe like 60 or 45 people, mostly former students, coming out and saying, yeah, I want to see my old classmates again. I want to see my principal. I want to see my English teacher again. So you can see, I'll just go here. This is Mr. Harris. He was the former English teacher. This is Ms. Lomax. She was the principal. These are all students, some of which are on our advisory council. There's Papan. And this was them coming together for a meal. You can just kind of see over here the food that we put out for this holiday get-together. And then this next image, from there, we had a couple months later a fun day, and this was entirely organized by who became what they called the Bobcats, which was a self-organized group of former students from Fair Hill who said, okay, so we used to have a fun day after every school year, which gave parents and to come out to see what we've done and our teachers. And so they said, we want to do one again. And so they organized this fun day. Loads of people. This was over, I think, 700 people coming out to this kind of block party event reunion for the entire neighborhood, which then became this installation, which is now in Tyler, commissioned obviously by Temple Contemporary and funded by the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage and the Serna Foundation, to create this room installation, which includes not only testimonies from the students of the school that's been closed, but also just a range of objects gathered from the school, mementos, trophies, all those things that you think back in your old elementary school that just sort of, decorated the place. It made it feel like it was of a successful school, not a failing school, were brought to the installation that Papan designed with the students from Fair Hill. So what we're looking at here is an installation shot. You can see behind the pencils are what looks like writing. So those are essays that the Bobcats literally wrote on walls. When we put the wallpaper up, those lines were empty, and we invited the Bobcats in to say, write about what it felt like to be in a school that was deemed failing, and how that's affected your self-esteem and your vision of yourself. And then the red marks that you're seeing are all of the remarks of Mr. Harris, the English teacher that I showed you in an earlier slide. So then he came in and actually sort of corrected and made comments to the students' essays directly on the walls. So it was that sense that you couldn't look in this installation without feeling what it was that the students were feeling as a result of their school being closed.
Yeah, that's great. I do have one last question before we open it back up to the group. Also, is that balance between, say, Pepa Osorio as an artist and the interests of the community, the first member of your group who asked the question, and all of the students that you engaged. How are you balancing all of the interests in expressing including your own interests as the curator, into one presentation? How is it that you're taking this input from the community and balancing that with, say, an artist's input to make something look a particular way, to end up with a presentation that feels coherent and is also serving the underlying purpose?
That's a great question. It's a complex one. I should start by saying that Papan is a trained social worker, and that was his life before becoming an artist. So in my selection to work with Papan on this, and I would really say the selection of Papan was kind of the limit of my curatorial input into a lot of the project. And I do believe that selection is an integral part of the curation. But I do want to make kind of draw a line between what we would normally maybe or conventionally consider a curator's input into an exhibition per se, and the ways in which allowing an artist with deep commitments to a neighborhood, and a neighborhood that has, I would say, deep and very real concerns about their future, to allow that to manifest itself inside the space of an exhibition. I feel that that's entirely important and completely necessary in the stage that Temple Contemporary is at, and I feel as though a lot of my colleagues and other institutions, that it's now become a forum really for discussion and for visual presentation that involves a range of participants and authors, and without that range, we kind of lose our social purpose, because I don't think that people necessarily think in exhibition terms, in terms of its calendar or its aesthetics, but I do feel that they think about what it is that's in front of them, and as long as we can create that connection and make that tighter, then I think whatever form the exhibition needs to take is kind of fine with me, really. In terms of balancing the whether we call it the authorship or the intentions of a range of individuals, I'll go back to what I said earlier about Temple Contemporary and its ongoing conversational curatorial strategy or ethos, in the sense of what you're seeing now are shots made of reform months ago, and now it looks very different in many respects, so that it is an ongoing process, and it is appreciated as such, and then therefore I think you could say sidesteps perhaps, or maybe just doesn't even engage with a lot of the ideas of, okay, the exhibition's done and it's the work of a sole author or artist, but rather that is an ongoing and evolving conversation and collaboration.
Jay, and other thoughts?
Oh, wonderful. And I think that really kind of led to my wrap-up question, which was, Rob, just your thoughts about how social justice can be incorporated, if you feel it can be incorporated into, because we have an array of people who are watching this panel and thinking, well, how can this apply to my field within in curating, and just kind of your thoughts. Do you feel that this can carry into other fields within our field, outside of contemporary art?
Definitely. I mean, my definition of the contemporary is probably similar to a lot of your own, perhaps, where it's contemporary as long as it's relevant to now. So it doesn't matter if the object, in my view, was made 200 years ago or 2 months ago. It's that sense of, if there is a connection to the ways in which we are dealing as a society at this moment in time, then it's definitely contemporary. And I think that the adoption of that view of curatorial practice can extend and be applicable to any range of fields within the museum world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert.
Yes.
So I'm going to turn to our final panelist, Jamila James, first with an introduction, and Robert, if you can close out your screen, we'll invite Jamila to share hers. So Jamila is the assistant curator at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, which is affiliated with UCLA. And she also organizes exhibitions and programs on behalf of the Hammer at Art and Practice. And so we're going to be discussing Art and Practice and what its special role is. Art and Practice is a space that was co-founded by an artist, by a collector, and by a community activist. And it has a really distinct mission in its partnership also with the Right Way Foundation, which supports foster youth in Leimert Park, Los Angeles, as well as with an amazing historic bookstore as a forum, a white cube, a gallery space in the center of an amazing historic community that's really bringing art to individuals in this neighborhood, as opposed to only citing art and art histories elsewhere. Jamila has experience prior to curating at the Hammer Museum and at Art and Practice. She held curatorial positions at the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Queens Museum in New York, and the Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago, so has experience in many urban centers. Her writing has been featured in a number of publications, including the International Review of African American Art, among others, and she's been a visiting lecturer and critic in numerous art schools and taught seminars on curatorial practice and contemporary art in both California and in RISD. So Jamila, we are so grateful to have you with us here today. Thank you for joining us. And I had the experience of visiting, of course, the Hammer Museum on many occasions, but most recently this past fall, visiting the Art and Practice space and seeing an excellent exhibition that you organized, one among many. And it was Deca Akinlele Crosby's exhibition, a solo show of her work, as well as two films by Akosua Adoma Obosu. And I know that you've organized a number of shows at Art and Practice, some in parallel with shows that are happening over at the UCLA campus at the Hammer, and some projects that are distinct. I'm wondering if you can tell us about, and maybe it's through on your screen, tell us about what it is that makes the experience of curating at Art and Practice unique, and how did it come about? What is its history? What is its mission?
Yeah. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Art and Practice was founded by Mark Bradford, Eileen Harris Norton, and Alan DeCastro last year, but it's something that's been in the works for a number of years. Mark is, well known in the art world and is a lifelong Angelino, and he'd been working in the Leimert Park neighborhood for a number of years. From the 90s when he was at Cal Arts as a student and continued to have a studio there. And one of the things that was inspirational to him was the experience of being in Leimert Park during the '92 uprisings and thinking about that neighborhood and how it's gone through so many cultural shifts over the years. Its proximity to Watts, which was the site of the Watts Rebellion in '65, again, the '92 uprisings, and some activity in response to what happened in Ferguson and other cultural centers around the country. So with coming into partnership with the Hammer, Mark has had a very long relationship with the museum and is quite close with our director, Annie Philbin, and they wanted to not only have a social services component to Art and Practice, which is focused on working with foster youth that are in the Crenshaw-Leimert Park area. There are 55,000 young people in the foster care system in California, which is at epidemic proportions, and the Crenshaw-Leimert area is quite unusual in that a high percentage of youth, almost about 50% in the public school system in Leimert Park, is in the foster care system. So Mark's mother was at some point a foster parent, and he really wanted to focus his energies and his considerable influence as an artist on addressing an issue that was very near and dear to his heart. So given that he had quite a close relationship with the Hammer, we were the natural fit to be the curatorial partner for this project because, of course, Mark is a very successful practicing artist, and he wanted to have his interest in contemporary art be reflected in that way, and also as a vehicle to shore up the rest of what Art and Practice is working with. The primary audience for Art and Practice isn't necessarily the foster youth that are in working with the Right Way Foundation and working with Art and Practice, but it's more the larger Leimert Park area. Leimert Park has a unique history. It's thought of as the cultural center of Black Los Angeles, and the Hammer began a very close engagement with Leimert Park and around 2008 through 2010 when we were working on the exhibition Now Dig This, Art in Black Los Angeles, that was organized by the art historian Kelly Jones. And some of the artists that we worked with were, native to Leimert Park, some of whom were like Dale Davis and Alonzo Davis, who ran the Brockman Gallery in the 60s through 1989. And one way that Mark wanted to tie the larger art history of Leimert Park to what he envisioned for art and practice was to start a residency program, and one of the artists in residence was Dale Brockman Davis, who was a founder of the Brockman Gallery. And one of the things that we did was reintroduce to the community of Leimert Park what Brockman was and why the legacy of Brockman informs a lot of other artist-run initiatives and spaces that are cropping up all over Los Angeles. It's a very exciting time to be in Los Angeles, but also, larger initiatives that have informed places like Art and Practice, like the Project Row Houses in Houston, or the Astor Gates's work with Dorchester Projects, now the newly opened Stony Bank Art Center, where there's this community component that's involved. And with Art and Practice, it's not thinking necessarily about introducing things to the existing audience in Leimert Park. People are quite savvy in Leimert Park and are very able to travel and go to other parts of the city where there's a lot of museums or spaces or cultural institutions available. It's really just opening the channels to have a cyclical conversation with Leimert Park and the audiences that would ordinarily go to Westwood, where the Hammer is located on UCLA campus.
Yeah. So I hope you can hear me. I think what's very interesting, and I think if Jamila, you can show us how it is that Mark Bradford and with Eileen and Alan were visualizing a history in a space and recentering a discussion, I guess, as opposed to introducing, recalling, and bringing back forward, and reciting a conversation with a sense of immediacy and with a sense of foundation right there, actually in a historic building. And so if you can show people sort of what the basically ground zero is of this project, what it looks like in the community, sure. I think we can get a sense of how it is also a beacon, not just of exhibitions now, but a reminder of where a lot of history and a lot of culture has come from. That seems very, very important to today.
Yeah. I'm going to open up my slideshow, and hopefully I'll do this correctly. Let's see. All right. I think, are we there?
Yep, great job.
Okay, here we are. All right, great. Woo. So Art and Practice is a series of buildings in Leimert Park. Mark has rented or purchased buildings that were in disuse in the neighborhood to repurpose them to become part of Art and Practice. What we're seeing here is the Art Deco building that's on the corner of 43rd and Leimert Park, and 43rd and Degnan in Leimert Park, which was initially to be the exhibition space, but it's since moved to the opposite corner for various reasons. But the places that I don't really have images of, and that's Mark, while they were doing a wheat pasting project to seal up the facade at the building at Art and Practice, is there's this building which will be home to a bookstore. S1 Books, which was across the street from Art and Practice, is slated to be the tenant for this, when S1 has been a long time presence in Leimert Park. It's a Black-owned bookstore that focuses quite a bit on social activism, social justice, works by Black authors and artists. They do a number of lectures and book signings with very important thinkers, and they seemed to be the perfect partner for this project. This is Eileen Harris Norton, who's a known collector and philanthropist, and Alan DeCastro, who's the executive director Art and Practice inside of the computer lab, which is used for the Right Way Foundation. The building that used to be Mark's studio before he relocated a couple of months ago used to house a nightclub that was quite popular in Leimert Park, and also Mark's mother's hair salon, which has been much talked about in the mythology of Mark Bradford, how he was a hairdresser while he was going to school at Cal Arts, and now this room that you see is actually his mother's former hair salon that's been absorbed into art and practice as a computer lab for the foster youth to use to look at job training, to look for jobs, to look for housing, to do research or to take classes to help them get on their feet and help them, situate themselves in the world after they transition out of the foster care system. This is the exhibition space for art and practice, which is about a 1,200 square feet room. This was on the occasion of Charles Gaines's opening at A&P. Charles was a teacher of Mark's at Cal Arts, and Mark thought it to be very important to have Charles be the first exhibition because of how influential he was on Mark's, coming into his own as an artist, and also to connect to the exhibition that was happening at the Hammer simultaneously, which was Charles's survey that came from the Studio Museum in Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
That's the external view. And this is a slide of the Brockman Gallery, which is now where the bookstore is going to be. This is around the corner from the gallery space on Degnan Boulevard, and the Brockman Gallery was active through 1989. It opened in '68. It was a space and an incubator for artists of color to have exposure, to test out ideas, and to have a space to exhibit, which wasn't necessarily available to artists at that time in Los Angeles right after the '60s and the Civil Rights Movement. Mm-hmm. And this is installation views from the exhibition that I organized with Dale Brockman of the ephemera that he had collected and stored for the Brockman Gallery. So there's all manners of exhibition announcements, price lists, images of artists, just to relocate the history of the gallery and the history of art in Black Los Angeles and in Leimert Park specifically in this new space, in this new venue, which is hopefully to be a part of a longer history of an arts, well, I don't want to say renaissance, but more or less a rejuvenation of that neighborhood, especially with all the things that are happening concurrently, like the development of the train system in Leimert Park that will go to LAX and certain other galleries and artist space that are opening in the neighborhood. And this is the Deca Akinyele exhibition that you mentioned, which it was important for Mark to not only focus on artists based in Los Angeles, but also to push the conversation into a global context. Deca is a Nigerian-born artist who hadn't shown in Los Angeles before, and this was organized in tandem with her exhibition at the Hammer that was happening concurrently. So one of the things that we'd like to do with this project is to have there be a constant flow of traffic between the two spaces, and to really not make it seem as if the Hammer is parachuting into this neighborhood, but that we have a long-term investment in the neighborhood.
Yep. And I would love to know, I think our attendees can now see how clean the White Cube space is of the art and practice space, and how is it that we could see the number of people who had gone to the Charles Gaines exhibition. How is it, I guess, well, Melanie used a beautiful word in the mission statement of MHM of trying to create a confluence, right? Have you noticed as a curator that audiences from across the UCLA campus and individuals who are connected to the history at Leimert Park, are there intentions, is part of the mission of art and practice to really bring histories together and audiences together and conversations together in a White Cube space? Is it an interest in activity even outside of the White Cube and beyond? What is, I guess, what are you hearing in terms of responses to the space as it's building up and coming in? And how is that shaping, I guess, what comes next in the program?
Sure. One of the things that we've been able to do with this project, which I should say is funded by the James Irvine Foundation, who underwrote the beginnings of our public engagement department, which is what art and practice is a part of, is that we have a system of evaluation that we're doing and employing with this project, which is to satisfy some of the grant concerns. So that we're working with two evaluators from UCLA who are actively going down to Leimert Park and, observing audiences in the space, asking, pointed questions about how they found out about art and practice, what are their feelings on the curatorial program, what would they like to see happen at art and practice, and kind of get a sense of what their feelings are about how the space relates to the larger history of Leimert Park and how they may want the space to be more active in certain conversations that are evolving outside and in tandem with the art world. So there's a report that we get periodically from the evaluators that kind of give us a heads up as to what some of the concerns are. Overwhelmingly, the response has been very positive from our partners in the community and our constituents in Leimert Park, and also people from that would ordinarily maybe not travel to Leimert Park, who are going there, who are part of the Hammers audience and extended family are going. But we're also getting it's been really surprising and really exciting that not only is there this audience cross-sharing, but there's also people from other institutions that have been very active in supporting what we have been doing at Art and Practice. We just opened an exhibition of John Outerbridge, who's a longtime Angelino, very large figure in the history of art in Los Angeles. We opened a solo show of recent works by him, and it was really beautiful to see a lot of John's friends and colleagues and older, more senior artists in Los Angeles come out for the opening. Betty Saar, there's our historian Samela Lewis, John Baldessari came, in addition to, the folks that would ordinarily frequent programs that the Hammer organizes. I think that we've done a good job of establishing trust in the neighborhood. Initially there was some confusion and a little bit of hesitance around embracing art and practice because there was, a kind of a cloak of mystery that enveloped the project initially. We weren't really, Mark wasn't really available to talk about the project because we were anticipating something else coming down the pike. So, a lot of people were concerned that this art and practice was, kind of an offshoot of some concerns about gentrification in the neighborhood, but eventually we were able to come out front row and center and say, no, this is an artistic project that's spearheaded by an artist. The Hammer has supported, this is the first time that the Hammer has done a major off-site project in its public engagement department. There was an earlier project in 2008 that the Hammer engaged with the local artist Edgar Arsenault in a residency, because we do run a residency program here, that was called the Watts House Project, which was also kind of a precursor to what we now understand to be our public engagement department, where Edgar and other people were rehabbing houses near the Watts Arts Tower. So this is kind of one of many projects, but this one is definitely the most ambitious and has definitely received a whole lot of attention from the public, from the art world at large. We've gotten some great reviews in different publications, national and international. So, we're very optimistic that we are going to succeed long term with this project. And, we are operating, I don't want to say in a mentorship capacity to Art and Practice as a foundation, but we are definitely supporting them as much as we can with our, tremendous resources at the museum to make sure that, eventually at some point when we are maybe no longer involved, that the organization can work as a fully fledged arts nonprofit and continue to build on, the legacy of what's been going on in that particular area and in Los Angeles at large.
I just will ask one last question before we open it up across the panel, and we have some questions from our attendees as well. I see a really amazing parallel between the activity at Art and Practice, which, again, I feel like is a very thoughtfully curated art history that's being put forward through the exhibition program, very deliberately so. And an interesting reset that Robert experienced when there was a change in location for Temple Contemporary, and what Melanie talked about in terms of being very thoughtful about creating a selective history that is reflective and sensitive to lives that are still ongoing and situations that are still unfolding. So in thinking about the exhibition program and thinking about histories that can be told, and you can't show 20 shows at a time. It's a space where it's pretty much, they seem like solo projects or solo archival projects. It seems like you must be very deliberate in the program that is being shared and the histories that are being told. So how do you make those decisions, and why is it meaningful that the program is the way it is?
The exhibition and program at Art and Practice is definitely selected by committee. I will pose certain ideas, and curators who are more senior to me at the museum will vet them, and we'll discuss them with Mark and Eileen and Alan to kind of come to a consensus about what it is that we want to present to the public. In the first year, there was a desire to concentrate on showing and highlighting artists of African descent at the space, just so that we could, I guess, get the audience, have the audience be comfortable with what we were putting into the programs there. And just also to something that Mark was very adamant about was really giving a face that was recognizable to contemporary art to a public that may, have certain ideas as to what contemporary art can constitute or who are the people that are making contemporary art. One of the things that we did on the front end was to really situate that, we are concentrating on artists of color in this space. We want there to be a continuing authorship of art history that, may not have, over the long term really given attention to certain artists who are really deserving, and also just to continue to have the conversation be open-ended, and so that people felt comfortable to ask certain questions about why is this artist working in this way, what is it about this particular practice that's important. At Charles Gaines' exhibition, Charles is a long-time Los Angeles resident who is a conceptual artist, and one of the things that we wanted to do was to help define the terms of what conceptual art could be to a broader audience who may not be familiar with certain practices. What was really intriguing about Charles's project for Art and Practice was that it was, in his vocabulary as an artist, working with repetition and scores and, making these references to cultural history. The project librettos paired a speech by Stokely Carmichael from 1967 with an opera from the 19th century. So there is this music component and thinking about music as a universal language, but also bringing in, the language of social justice, activism, so on and so forth, to really foreground that, we are committed to these issues, and that, as curators, it's not just, oh, wait a minute, did I do that wrong? Okay.
There you go.
Okay, what's going on? Okay. That as curators, oh wait, can you see me still?
Yep.
There you are. Yes.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yes.
That as curators, by definition, we're supposed to care for things, and it can't just be about objects. It has, or artists. It has to be about audiences and communities, and we just wanted to set the terms very early on so that we could do more experimental things later down the line. I'm currently working on a show that's going to open in March called The Shape That Stands Up. Yeah, it's, what's happening? That's called The Shape That Stands Up, that looks at the intersection of figuration and abstraction with artists that are depicting the body in various forms of becoming or unbecoming, as it were. So it's going to be a cross-generational, cross-racial group of artists, some more senior artists like Robert Colescott and Carol Dunham, and also more junior artists who may not be familiar to Los Angeles artists. So there's always this ongoing conversation about wanting to do something new in the space of art and practice, but also be cognizant of, the history that's unfolded in the neighborhood and in Los Angeles. And the same thing with the public programs, which I also organize. We've brought in a number of artists from all over the country like Kevin Beasley and Jenny C. Jones, but also tapped into local resources and local scholars like Fred Moten and the musicologist Pat Thomas. So there's this, back and forth. It's very elastic how we're approaching the curatorial program, but it's all with the thinking that we want to do something new and daring and nearly radical in the space to kind of piggyback on the history that's already been in place.
That is a great summary of the mission, and again, I want to pivot right now, but before that, just thank all of you for the deep insights and the case studies that you've given us. And we do have a few questions from our attendees that I can begin to share back to you all. And I'll follow up first with one to you, Jamila, and then come back to you, Robert and Melanie. But one question that's coming from one of our attendees to you, Jamila, is that AMP, I'm reading this now, is in a different neighborhood from the Hammer. So one of the questions was, is bringing the residents of Leimert Park through the Hammer Museum's doors also a priority? Does that matter to the mission of A&P? And if so, if you can just, maybe in 1 minute address
Sure.
that question.
Absolutely. What we really, really wanted to do on the outset of this project is to open up our doors. I mean, the Hammer is quite unusual in Los Angeles in that we are, I think, the only free museum in the city, which makes a huge difference to people who may not want to or cannot spend the money to go to a museum and feel as if, museums are exclusive spaces that are not for them. Also with situating art and practice in Leimert Park, a so-called underserved neighborhood, we wanted to, bring the programming there, but also have our doors be open to accept anyone, and anyone that wants to come to the Hammer, they can do so at any point. Our programs are free to the public 365 days of the year. We do a wide range of public programs, screenings, concerts, so on and so forth, and exhibitions. So, yeah, what we set up in Leimert Park is pretty much mirrored by what we do at the Hammer. I mean, our mission is to deliver the promise of art and ideas to illuminate our lives and to build a more just world. What is a more just idea than, making art free and accessible to the public at all times?
Yep. And I can see a question also here for Rob. I'm not sure, Deca, can you see that as well?
Let's see. Yes. Rob, this is about the flexible exhibition schedule. The question is, after interest wanes in any given topic, how do you quickly move on to the next topic and organizing a new exhibition without having the gallery empty for too long?
Sure. So that's a great question because we've come up with a pretty specific way of trying to make that work, which is that we usually have anywhere between 3 and 5 questions at any one time in the Temple Contemporary space. And so by doing that, we don't fill the space, you could say, with an exhibition. What we do is when we have an event or a guest speaker or whatever it may be, I ask those people to not do a PowerPoint, but to rather bring the objects that are related to that particular event. So when someone comes, they also come with a bunch of stuff. And we put that stuff in the gallery to not only demonstrate, but also hopefully extend the conversation with real objects. And so from that, those objects stick around longer than the event itself. So what you generally have is an accumulation of things, some of which relate to some topics and others to others. And it's through that we can see when people go around or when they're talking in conversation with myself or other people on staff here, you begin to feel out what people are gravitating towards and what is actually kind of maybe boring or not of interest to them any longer. And so those things come out and other things stay. So it's this constant rotation and sort of chewing through different objects related to the topics.
Very good. And Melanie, briefly in our last few minutes together, there is a question directly to you specifically about how it is that when MHM responded to events in Ferguson, were there exhibitions or programs that you had to put on hold? As in, did the institution put something else on pause to be able to make that a priority? And so how is that managed?
No, actually, we were lucky enough. As I say, unfortunately, these types of events have been happening more and more throughout our country. So we actually had a slate of programs that related to those issues: educational equity, prison reform. So we had a variety of different issues that already related to Ferguson on tap. So we only really did about 3 new programs that community members brought to us, and we were able to put those in our calendar.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I want to thank all of you again for sharing perspectives about especially convening individuals who have great expertise and intention in engaging with the community, if it's Mark Bradford or Pepin Osorio or an amazing speaker at a town hall meeting, and also thinking about how it is that partnerships can actually create not just a subject, a curatorial subject, but actually curatorial structure, right? Thinking about how our work is important in building the histories and the sense of identifying with the issues of our time and the people around us. So I feel like the many perspectives you brought to the conversation were exceptional, and Deja, it's such a pleasure to partner with you on leading the discussion. And I'm grateful that in our brief minutes together that we were able to get some great snapshots of the good work you're doing across the country. So thank you again for your time, and thank you to everybody who attended today. And again, you can check in on ourcurators.org for a recording of this webinar if you have any follow-up. Thank you so much, and thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.